Beersheva, Vayelech Harona. Yaakob left Beersheva, where he was at home with his parents, and he went on his way to Haran. Now, it's interesting, the Gemara says, and Rashi brings it down, that it tells you that if a tzaddik leaves a place, there's an impression, there's a loss, people feel a loss. But the question that they ask is, Abraham left his home, we don't learn that lesson. Yitzchak left his home and went to Avimelech. Rashi doesn't tell us this lesson, it's only now. And the answer that they give is that the impression is only left on the tzaddikim left behind. When Avraham left his home, nobody cared. Those who were there could care less if Avraham was in Haran or not in Haran. When Yitzchak left, nobody cared. When Yaakob left, his parents cared. There was a certain loss. For example, when someone like Rabbi Yosef passes away, or someone like Moshe Feinstein passes away, people felt the difference. But which people? The community, the Jewish community, the religious community. You know, people in Oklahoma didn't know the difference. It didn't make a difference to them. In many communities across the United States or the world, it didn't make a difference. It only makes a difference when you feel the loss. And the only one who felt the loss at this point was Yitzchak and Rivka, which we're going to go into a little bit more detail in a moment. When you go to Eretz Yisrael, it's called making aliyah. You're going up in Kedusha. When you leave Eretz Yisrael, it's called Yerida. But it doesn't say that here. It says, Vayetze Yaakob in Beersheva. It doesn't say, Vayered Charona. He went down to Haran. It says, Vayelech. He left. He went to Haran. So the Meforshim say a very interesting insight. They say, when Yaakov left Israel, he took the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael with him. I mean, sometimes when a person leaves, they leave the Kedusha behind, and therefore they feel the emptiness. Not Yaakov, he took it with him. We're going to see in a moment more about that. At any rate, when he traveled from Beersheba to Haran, it took about 3 or 4 weeks. When he got to Haran, he realized that he had passed the place of the Beit HaMikdash, where Avraham had brought Korbanot and Yitzchak had brought Korbanot. So what happened? He went back. How long did it take him to go back? Kfitzat HaDerech. It took him no time at all. As a matter of fact, the way the Gemara describes it, Hashem folded the whole world underneath him, and he took one step and unfolded the world, and he was already there in the Beit HaMikdash. So on his way to Haran, it took him 3 weeks or 4 weeks, no Kfitzat HaDerech. When he realized that he forgot to daven at the place of the Beit HaMikdash, poof, warp speed. He gets back there in 10 seconds. Why? So someone asked the Brisker Rav this question. He gave a fascinating answer. Listen to this answer. When Yaakov left Beersheba to go to Haran, whose instructions was he following? Mom. Father and mother. Every step he took, he got a mitzvah, kibud av v'ein. So when you're doing a mitzvah, Hashem doesn't give you kfitzat haderech, he'll be taking away your reward. Once he got to Haran and he forgot, that had nothing to do with Yitzchak and Rivka. No one told him to daven there. So there Hashem says, the faster I get you back, and the faster I get you back to Beit Lavan, the faster you're going to be following your father's instructions. So then he had kfitzat haderech. But on your way, Hashem doesn't give you a shortcut. Hashem gives you reward for every step you take. Same thing with Eliezer. Eliezer watches Rivka. Rivka takes the pitcher of water, puts it near the water. What happens? The water jumps into the pitcher. Yeah. Great, wonderful. But when he says, I want you to give me to drink and my camels to drink, now the water's not jumping. Now she has to take the pitcher, fill it up, empty it, fill it up. She's doing the mitzvah. When you're doing a mitzvah, there are no shortcuts. The harder you work at the mitzvah, the more rewards you get. And that's what the lesson that they're teaching you is. The harder you work, the more rewards you get. Okay, next question. When a person says goodbye to somebody, you have 2 ways to say it. You can say to the person, Leich lishalom, or Leich bishalom. What's the right way? Lishalom is the right way. Lishalom. You should go to peace. Bishalom means go with peace, means you're dead. It means that there's no more growth. The Gemara says as follows. Listen what the Gemara says. The Gemara brings down, Amar Rabbi Oven Halevi, Haniftene Chaveiro, a person's leaving his friend. Al Yomer lo lech bishalom, don't say lech with peace, bishalom. Elo lech lishalom, to peace. Shara Yisro Shalom Moshe lech lishalom, Olav Yitzliach. Yisro said to Moshe lech lishalom, Moshe was successful. David said to Avshalom, Lech Bishalom, what happened to Avshalom in the end? He died. What's the problem? Yaakob in this week's Parsha says, V'shafti Bishalom al Beit David. He doesn't say Lishalom, he says Bishalom. Why? So the Meforshim give a fascinating answer, a very fascinating answer. The Meforshim say that Yaakov said to Hashem, normally, I would say, Lech Lishalok. I want to grow. You know, my problem is going to Lavan's house. What are my chances of growing? Zero. Just the opposite. Instead of going up, what's going to happen?
No.
I'm going to go down. So I want to be Bishalok. Keep me where I am. That means I don't want to, I'm not asking to get greater and smarter and have more religion. But I don't want to come back destroyed and ruined. So I'm davening that I should be like a dead person. Lech Bishalom. What I have today, in 2022, it should be the same. It's a fascinating, fascinating thing. The importance of knowing who you are, where you are. There's an interesting story. Listen to this story. There was a person who, his whole life, he wrote Divrei Torah. He would sit in the base medrash, he would sit at home, he would learn, always had paper and pen in front of him. And he always wrote Divrei Torah. As he was getting older and he became sick, he left a will. In the will he wrote, when I die, I want all my Divrei Torah to be buried with me. That's what he wrote. Very unusual. The guy dies, they discover the will, the Chevra Kaddish doesn't know what to do. Should we honor his wish and bury his papers with him? Or maybe we should publish it in a book. Who was the rabbi in Yerushalayim at that time? Rabbi Yoshua Leib Diskin. Famous rabbi, very well-known rabbi. So they went to him and said to him, what should we do? So Rabbi Diskin is a very smart man. He said as follows. He says, bring me a sample of something he wrote. Let me see what he wrote. His whole life he was writing. Pull out a piece of paper, let me see what it says. So they bring him a sample. This week's Parsha. It says that Yaakob had a dream. And in the dream he saw a ladder. The ladder with the foot at the base on the earth, in the top in Shemayim. And the angels were going up and down the ladder. So he writes in his notes, he says, why do angels need a ladder? Right? Angels don't need ladders, right? They can fly, I guess, whatever, you know. However you picture an angel. That was his question. Good question. Many people ask the question. There are many answers to that question. This is what he writes. He writes, in my opinion, they were probably baby angels that didn't know how to fly yet. That means they were still angels with training wheels. Angels with training wheels. So when Rabbi Yeshua Leib Diskin saw that, he says, you know what? These Divrei Torah you can bury. You can put them into the, you don't have to publish this, you can bury it. Who said this story? Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Rosh Hashiva of Kol Torah. What was his message? He says as follows. He says, we see from here how important it is to have a Rebbe. How important it is to go to a shiur. How important it is to have a chavrusa. That means when people learn by themselves and have no interaction and no guidance, they make mistakes. They reach false conclusions. We have a guy in Kew Gardens who likes to stand out on his porch with his coat and his talit on, and he davens at 6 o'clock in the morning on his porch in the winter. So he once asked me what I thought of it. So I said to him, I says, well, do you know anybody that does this? He says, no. I says, did you consult any rabbi whether this is a good thing? He said, no. I says, do you know anybody in Kew Gardens that does this? He says, no. So I says, well, when you do something that nobody else does, and nobody discusses, and nobody recommends, and nobody suggests, stop. It's not a good idea.
That's wrong.
It's not a good idea. You know, you're making up a new religion. We don't make up new religions. You know, we don't wake up one day and say, you know, I'm going to daven standing on one foot. No, we don't do that. We don't do those things. It sounds a little crazy, you know. Try to keep things more or less simple. Okay. Anyway.
What he said, did you tell him this?
Oh, yeah.
And what he said?
He's still doing it. He said, thank you very much, but no thank you. Okay. Listen. Not everybody that asks me advice follows my advice. Now, I had a bunch of phone calls today with people who, if they had followed my advice, they wouldn't be calling me now crying in desperation. But that's a different story. Sometimes it's good to follow advice. Especially when someone has some gray hair, he's earned that, to follow some advice. Not always, but sometimes. It says, Ulam Luz Shemo Yir L'Rishona. Luz was a very unusual city. Betel, Luz, Rashi says, the Gemara in Sota says, that it was the city where they made the blue dye for tzitzit, tchelet, for tzitzit. It was a city Sancheiriv never could mix up. Nebuchadnezzar could not conquer. Even the Malach HaMovis was not allowed in the city. There was a big sign that says, Malach HaMovis, stay home. Lose. Even the Malach HaMovis could not go in. Right. Why? Because they had a spring, a well, that the water from Gan Eden that flowed from underneath the Eitz HaChaim was that well, and people drank it. So even if you got cut, and an artery was cut, you took some of the water, you drank it, you lived. No one ever died. So then the Gemara says, listen what the Gemara says. Gemara in Sota. Zekenim Shabo, the elders, when they were 100, 200, 300 years old, Bizman Shadaitam Kotzaleh, when they were tired of living so long, what did? They would walk out of the city, and they would die. So the Tzitz Eliezer, the famous Rav Lezer Voldenberg, who was the posek for Shari Tzedek Hospital, he asked, he says, why walking out of the city, isn't it like committing suicide? When you walk out of the city, you drop dead. If you walk out of the city, you drop dead, it's like committing suicide. You can't walk in front of a car that's driving, you can't jump off a building. Why is that not suicide? So he answers, he says, because you didn't do anything. The nature of the world is people live and people die. All you're doing is going back to time. In Luz, time was suspended. People live forever. All you're doing is you're going back to the reality of where you always were. When you go back to the reality of where you always were, that's not considered suicide. Okay. The next thing is fascinating. Listen to this. There's a person, Rabbi Gamliel Rabinowitz. Have you ever heard? He's a big Kabbalist, Rabbi Gamliel Rabinowitz. He wrote, every sefer he writes starts with the word Tiv. And he wrote a sefer on Shidduchim called Tiv HaShidduchim, the secret of Shidduchim, of marriage. So listen to what he says. He says, Yaakob married Leah. At night he didn't know it was Leah. By Hiva Boker, when he woke up in the morning, B'nei Leah, behold, it's Leah. So of course everybody asked, at night it was also Leah, he just didn't realize it. Now Rochel and Leah were twins. According to the Gemara, what kind of twins were they? They were identical twins. Yaakov and Esau were twins, but they were not identical. They were very different. But Rochel and Leah were identical twins. So without the simonim, without the signs, you really could not tell them apart. I mean, I know people who are identical twins. It's not so easy. When you get to know them for a while, you get to know them apart. And Yaakov was there for 7 years, and then he worked another 7 years. Listen to what Rabbi Gamliel says. Rabbi Gamliel Abinu says that Yaakov, when he woke up, realized that's not the girl I married. I was supposed to marry Rachel, it's Leah. He says most people, when they get married, after a few years, wake up and say, you know what? That's not the girl I married.
After a few years?
after a few days, hours, months. I'm trying to be kind. Most of the time I hear it not from the men that that's not the girl I married. I hear it from the women, that's not the man I married. I thought I was marrying Abraham and I come out as Yitzchak or some vice versa. I'll give you an example, he says. He says that when couples come to him for counseling, before they get married, he asks them on a piece of paper, write why you decided to marry your wife or your husband. So he gives an example. He says he asked the wife, a woman, you're about to get married to Moshe. Why do you want to marry Moshe? So she wrote in her letter, she wrote that Moshe has so many friends and he's so popular and everybody likes him and he's so friendly and he's so outgoing and I'm really impressed by this. And he took it and he put it in an envelope and wrote her name on it and he kept it in his drawer. 2 years later, she comes back, I want a divorce. So he says to her, Leah, why do you want a divorce? What's wrong with Moshe? He says, I can't take it anymore. Moshe is never home. He's always with his friends. He has so many friends. He's always going out with his friends. He's always so friendly. I want him to stay home. He pulls out the letter and he says to her, but that's why you married him. You wrote in your letter that you married him because he has so many friends and he's so friendly and he's so outgoing. She said, I didn't know what I was talking about back then. I didn't know what I was talking about. And Rabbi Gamliel says something fascinating. He says you should just know that the importance of couples before they get married to go to a rav and speak to someone. Because they think this is important, that's important, and they don't realize that what they think today is important is nothing, it's insignificant. And what's really important they're not even thinking about. So they're so lost. And if they would get proper direction or proper guidance, it would make the marriage a lot healthier. And this is speaking from someone who does 2 visits in a week. I'm telling you, it's gotten epidemic proportions out there. Now, let's go a little bit further. Rachel was a shepherd. She used to take care of sheep. Leah, what did Leah do? She stayed home. Why? Why was Leah the stay-home person and Rachel the sheep lady? So the Gemara says, the Medrash says, that the Eine Leah Rachos, Leah's eyes were weak. Why? Because she cried a lot. When you have weak eyes, you can't be out in the sun too long. A shepherd is out in the sun too long. So look at the irony. She cried and had weak eyes, so she should marry Yaakob and not Esau. But because she cried so much, she stayed home. So when Yaakob came, who was the first person he saw? Rachel. Had she not cried so much, she might have been out there with the sheep, and therefore she might have met Yaakov first. So there's a certain irony. But there's a second answer that is amazing. What's amazing is that Lavan thought of this. Not that we learn from Lavan, although there are certain things we do learn from Lavan, but Lavan is not the type of a Rabbi that we learn from. But listen to the godless, the brilliance of Lavan in this one area. Lavan said to himself, my sister Rivka had 2 children, Esau and Yaakov. I have 2 daughters, Rachel and Leah. Let's figure out, what kind of a person was Esau? He was a Yishur, they had side Yishur there. Where did Esau spend most of his time? In the field. So what kind of a wife does he need? He needs a stay-home wife. Because if he's out in the field all day, he needs a wife who's home. So Leah, who's supposed to be his wife, he trained her to stay home. How to cook, how to bake, how to sew. He prepared Leah for Esau. Yaakov. Yaakov was a kollel guy. Yaakov went to yeshiva, kollel all day, all night. What kind of a wife does he need? Someone that has a job, right? Someone who can make money. That's Rachel, the shepherd. She's out there, she has a job. You know, I meet with couples, let's say with parents. Parent comes to me with their daughter who's 19 years old. Rabbi, do you know a shidduch for my daughter? I said, okay. What are you looking for? She says, I want a yeshiva boy. You want him to learn the kollel? Yes. How many years? 10 years, 15 years. I want him to be a Rosh Yeshiva. I said, great. Tell me what you do for a living. She says, why is that important? I said, well, listen. Someone has to pay to support it. So if you want a kollel guy, You went to college, either you're a PA or you're you do a CPA, medical billing, you know. You have to have some parnasa.
Mortgage broker.
Right, you could be a mortgage broker even. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could be. But you know, but it's something. You can't tell me, I never went to school, I don't work, I don't make any money, and I want a guy who's gonna learn in kollel. You're not ready for it. Unless your father has a PhD. If your father has a PhD, that's fine. You know what a PhD stands for? Papa has dough. PhD means Papa has dough. That's what the PhD. Papa has money. If Papa has dough, Papa has a PhD, Papa has dough, then you know, okay, then you can stay home and your husband can learn to go now. You know? But if, so I tell the girl, you tell me what you want, I can tell just from, if you're studying to get a job that makes $80,000, you can marry a kollel guy. But if you're not working, if you have no training, then what you're looking for is unrealistic. Unfortunately, I don't want to say that we learned that out from Lavan, but we do. That's one of the insights that Lavan had. Lavan had this ability, you know, to be able to do it. He prepared his wife for the future, which is something that is extremely fascinating.
How did Lavan knew about they gonna married to?
Everybody seemed to know. So much so that they were talking about it for so long that Leah was crying. She didn't want to marry him. Okay? So, you know, that's something we need to know. Now, the next thing that we spoke about a little bit last week, and I want to go over it again with you. But as I mentioned to you, what I'm about to tell you now, you're not going to find in Art Scroll. Art Scroll won't write what I'm about to say to you. They won't publish what I'm about to say to you. Because in Art Scroll, everybody's perfect. You know, everybody was born in Rosh Hashiva from the moment they entered this world. It's just the way it is. And what I'm going to tell you is now, I said to you last week as follows. It said last week, Yitzchak loved Esav. Kitzai b'pi, Esav was tricky. Rivka loved Yaakob. We mentioned that Rivka grew up in a home with Lavan and Besuel, so she knew who was real, who was fake. Yitzchak was naive. The problem with that is that during those first 15 years that Yitzchak loved Esav and everybody said he was being fooled, Avraham Avinu was there also. And Avraham Avinu loved Esav, and Esav loved Avraham Avinu. And as a consequence, you could say Yitzchak was fooled, but Avraham was no fool. Avraham grew up in a home with Terach. Avraham grew up with Nimrod. Avraham knew Lavan and Besuel. So he had experience to know who's real and who's a faker. So you want to say Yitzchak couldn't see well and you could fool him, it doesn't work for Avraham. We mentioned last week that there was a plan. The plan was that Esau would marry Leah. Yaakov would marry Rachel. Esau and Leah would have 6 children, and Yaakov and Rachel would have 6 children. Of the 6 children that Esau and Leah would have, they were very powerful children. Reuven, Shimon, not so much. Levi, the kahuna, came from Leah and Esau. Yehuda, Malchus, came from Yehuda, from kings. Esau and Leah. As a matter of fact, if you would have seen David HaMelech with his red, fiery hair, you would have said, who does he look like? He was an Esau. And people said he was a murderer. And they said, no, he only took life because the Sanhedrin gave him reshus. But otherwise you would say, this guy's not Jewish. And they didn't think he was. He was from Moab. They thought he had some spoiled blood in him. Even Yisachar Zebulun, the whole relationship between this world and the next, support of Torah and the learning of Torah, is all Esav and Leah, Esav and Leah, Esav and Leah. That plan didn't work out. We mentioned that Abraham believed in this plan. Yitzchak believed in this plan. And it was a good plan. And it had a lot of strength to it. Because if Yaakov and Esau could have been together, it would have been Israel with the west. And the only one on the outside would have been Yishmael was the east. We're very lucky that when we deal with the Yishmaelim today, at least the west more or less is on our side. because the Ishmaelim bomb and terrorize Western countries as much as they do Jews. You know, we're lucky. If the Ishmaelim would not bomb the United States, or France, or Belgium, or England, we'd be in serious trouble, right? As it is, we're still in serious trouble. Right. But you know, it's very hard to support the Ishmaeli causes when every day you're reading of some suicide bomber killing 50 innocent people. You know, Baruch Hashem, there's ISIS, and ISIS is destroying Western civilization.
And they're killing each other.
Right. You know, my father used to say when they one killed the other, they said, "I wish them both success." You know, I wish them both hatzlacha. You know, they both should be hatzlacha. You know, but you know, and then we went even further. We went even further from a Kabbalistic point of view. I mentioned to you, Rabbi Gedalia Shor, from the Machshava point of view, he said you had Adam, 10 generations, you had Noah. 10 generations, everybody thinks Abraham is down here. No, Abraham started his own line. Abraham was like Adam Arishon. He had no connection with the past. That's why when you say in the Gemara someone is a Ben Noach, it means he's not Jewish. We are Ben Noachs. We're from Shem Ben Noach. No. A Jew is a Jew. It's a separate line. You can't cross the lines, therefore we don't intermarry. Abraham was going to start his own line. He was going to live forever, and Esau believed in Abraham, and when Sarah died, Abraham realized that he was only succeeded 50%. Yer, the Toshav Anochi Mochem, the Neshama is a stranger, will go back to Shemayim. Abraham created Olam Haba. Toshav, the body, remains forever. Esau couldn't accept this. Esau rejected this. And that's why when he was 15 years old, he said, behold, I'm going to die. The question that's much harder to understand is, what was Yaakov's perception? And I touched upon this last week, but I want to go into it from this week, from the Ozdayim LaTorah, by Zalman Sorotsky. It's a shocking statement. I want you to understand it because the Avos had a certain human nature to it that most people don't talk about. Avraham and Sarah had Ishmael and Yitzchak. They didn't like the influence of one to the other. What was their solution? Who left the house? Ishmael. You're the bad influence? Goodbye. Yitzchak and Rivka had the similar problem. They had one child, Yaakob, a good kid, and they had a child that was a negative influence. Who did they ask to leave? The good one, Yaakob. Yaakov resented that. Now, how far did his resentment go? I mentioned to you that after being away 14 years in Shem Ephraim, and 22 years in Beit Lava, 36 years he was away from home. When he came back to Israel and was only a few hours away from mom and dad, 2 years he did not go home. And when he finally went home, the one person who loved him the most, his mother, had died already. He wasn't at a funeral. As a matter of fact, I was reading today in the Ocha Pelos HaTorah that Rivka was buried at night and no one was there. Yaakov wasn't there. Yitzchak couldn't attend, he was blind. And the Bnei Chet buried her quickly because they didn't want Esau to come and cause trouble. So Rivka was buried in the Marat HaMachpelah at night with no family members there. No eulogies, nothing. And why? Because Yaakov didn't go home. For 2 years he didn't go home. The Oznayim LaTorah says something shocking. When Yaakov is on his way, Hashem comes to him and he says, Ani Hashem Elokei Avraham Avicho Velokei Yitzchak. What's missing by Yitzchak? Avicho, doesn't say his father. Hashem says, I know how you feel. I know you're angry. I am the God of your father Avraham. It wasn't my father, my grandfather, but he was close to his grandfather. Velokei Yitzchak. Doesn't say Avicho. Leaves it out. Because Yaakov didn't see his father as a father. The Oznayim LaTorah writes something here. I'm going to read it to you. It's shocking. He says, whenever Yitzchak referred to Esau, you know what he called him? Esau Bini, Esau my child. Even when Gehenna opened up in front of him. Remember when Esau came with the brachot and Gehenna opens up in front of him? It says that Esau cried, Dad, don't you have a bracha for me? And you know what he says? Gehenna is open. What can I do for you, my son? So Yitzchak sees Gehenna and he still calls Esau my son. How many times in the Torah does Yitzchak refer to Yaakob by the word Bini, my son? 0. 0. As a matter of fact, it will be Yaakob, he writes, Lo nimtza betorah shekora b'shem hazeh. Doesn't call him my son. Even after he knew he was a tzaddik, and even after he gave him the brachot, and even after he says, Gam baruch tiyeh. Lo chavavo af pam. He never endeared him, not even once. Lekaro b'shem b'ni. To even call him my son. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Yitzchak believed so strongly in the plan, even though the plan had fallen apart. Maybe Yitzchak believed that when you have a child at risk, it's easy to throw the child out, but keep the child home, because you can influence a child, you can guard the child. There could be a lot of different reasons. But one thing is clear. When Yaakov left home, if you would have asked him, who's your father? He said, Abraham. What about Yitzchak? I know him. When he came back after 36 years, they said, are you going to go see mom and dad? He said, no. Maybe in a few months? No. 2 years later, after Rivka died, he finally made it back home. Finally made it back home. It's hard to understand. Hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard to understand. What you don't realize is, at what point did Yaakov reconnect with his father? We call that a reconciliation. I'll tell you. If you look in Parshas Vayigash, after Yosef says, I need Yosef, is my father still alive? There was a conversation. Yosef said to his father, Dad, how come you didn't look for me? Yaakov says, what are you talking about? I looked all over for you. But I was 12 years in jail. I thought you were dead. Why would you think I was dead? Well, the coat came back all bloody. Did you see my body? I didn't see your body. I always said, my dad's coming for me. My dad's going, I'm your favorite. You love me. When Yaakov realized that the son who he really loved misunderstood him and misunderstood everything he did, he says, you know what? If Yosef could misunderstand me, there's a good chance that I misunderstood my father. And he went, and the Pasuk brings us down in Vayigash. Vayisa Yaakob le Beersheva. Yaakov travels to Beersheva, where he grew up. And he brings many korbanot. Le'elokei aviv Yitzchak. And doesn't mention Avram at all. Children often realize their parents' guidance only after they have children of their own. My kids often tell me, now I understand why you did what you did when we were growing up. All the years that we were growing up, they never understood why I did what I did. And they were probably right, I was probably wrong. But besides that, after children have their own children, we as parents call that karma. We always wish that our children have children just like them. So they should know what we went through. They understand better what we went through. So, in a strange way, Yaakov realized better his father's choices and decisions when he had to figure out how to juggle Yosef and the jealousy of all the brothers, and Reuven, what he did, and Shimon and Levi, what they did. It took a while for Yaakov to understand the wisdom of mom and dad. But in the end, he understood it. But at least you get an insight into the personality of the others. Okay. It says, Vayashkem Lavan Baboker, we're almost finished, it's already 9:30. Lavan woke up in the morning. Vayelech, Vayoshav Lavan Limikomo. Lavan went back home. Very interesting medrash. The medrash says Lavan was always poor. No one trusted him. He was a thief. When did he become successful? When Yaakob was there. Then he throws Yaakob out, and he comes back home, he's just as poor as he was before. The Medrash says that while he was ransacking the camp of Yaakob, robbers were coming and ransacked his own home, and punched holes in the wall and took all his jewels. So when Lavan came back, he was just as poor as he was before Yaakob came. It's an amazing thing. All the years Yaakob was there, all the blessings Yaakob got, all the support of Torah that he did, and all the brachas that came to him, in the end, he recognized none of it. He was just where he was. Vayoshav Lavan mimakomo. He says, in life, very often we like to think people grow and people change. But very often people come full circle. They start at a point, they're very successful, but somehow they don't appreciate that success and they end up right where they started. The very last thing, there's a Tosfos in Kiddushin. Tosfos says, Rabbi Tam had a problem, a case, where a rich man, or someone came to a rich man and said, here's money to marry your daughter. Great, he had 5 daughters. Which daughter did you marry? So Tosfos says, you marry the oldest daughter. But he was talking about the middle daughter. Why did he marry the older daughter? He says, it's a pasuk. We don't do this in our place, to marry the younger before the older. So they start saying to him, what? We're learning from Lavan now? We're learning Torah from Lavan? Lavan was a crook. We don't learn from Lavan. So they say that nobody is married. When Moshe Feinstein, in his Igros Moshe, someone asked a question. He says, you have a family, the firstborn is a boy, he's 21, he's not ready to get married. The next one is a girl, she's 20, she's ready to get married. Does she have to wait for her brother?
No.
So the brother says, I don't want you to get married before me. Now you have to listen to your older brother. So Rav Moshe says, we don't learn things from Lavan. Yaakob was okay for Yaakob. If I have a choice to learn from Yaakob or Lavan, I'm going to learn from Yaakob. I'm not going to learn from Lavan. The older brother, feels bad, so he says, you know what, Shidduchim come from Shamayim. Tell the older brother, and this is what Rav Moshe writes, tell the older brother to get over it. He'll be fine, just get over it. And he says, the same thing is if you have 2 sisters. You have an older sister and a younger sister, and the older sister just hasn't found her right girl. Do we make the younger sister wait? The answer is no. If the older boy doesn't put on tefillin that day, does the younger one not put on tefillin? He puts on tefillin. And if the older son doesn't keep Shabbos, does the younger ones keep Shabbos? They keep Shabbos. Because we don't hold one person back. Everybody's their individual. And therefore, nobody's held back. He does say one thing. He says if a family has 2 girls both engaged, and the wedding of this girl is going to be, let's say, Rosh Chodesh Shvat, this girl shouldn't get married before. She should get married after sister. Sister both engaged anyway. So he says that's the only time you could wait till, if you're both engaged, let the older one get married first. But other than that, he says, we don't learn from Lavan. We learn from Yaakob. That was a tshuva that Moshe Feinstein wrote. So with that, we conclude. The Shabbat happened Aliyah. It's already 9:30. And we do this once a week.